Hello and welcome to episode 109 from Espionage to Leadership Role of Women in Intelligence Agencies. We have previously discussed several aspects of intelligence and security on this podcast, primarily looking at the complex topics like the geopolitics and the intervention of the global world order, the kind of relations, economics, and how all these things play out in the intelligence and the kind of impact it has on a global level as well, including the common citizens. But what intrigued me is that even after completing 100 episodes, I realized the fact that I never really had any female intelligence officer or even a leadership position female officer who will be speaking on this podcast. So I had tried my best to find out the people, but I was fortunate enough to meet today's speaker. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with us. So, without any delay, I would like to welcome on board Lindsay Moran. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the
Hi,
podcast.
thank
Thank
you
you
for
very
having
much.
me.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, like, I have been reading about your journey, both on and off field as well, and your current work as well, the kind of perspective that you have currently on the world order. But before we actually deep dive into the topic, can you tell us a brief introduction about yourself? Because this is the first time we are hosting a former intelligence officer, a female intelligence officer. This is the first time
Sure,
that is happening. So please feel free to introduce yourself.
absolutely. I'm Lindsay Moran, and I'm a former CIA operations officer in the Central Intelligence Agency's clandestine service. So, what most people commonly think of as a spy. And I left the agency years ago, actually. I was there from 1998 to 2003. But I left and I wrote a book called Blowing My Cover My Life as a CIA Spy that was kind of a cheeky, a little bit chiclety memoir, but it really ruffled a lot of feathers at the agency at the time that it was published. Of course, I had to have it cleared by the CIA in advance, which I did. But my book pulled back the curtain a little bit on the CIA. And what I was really trying to do with the book, and what I've tried to do, I think, since then, is put a human face on what it is to be a spy and really give folks the kind of the unvarnished, not Hollywood view of what a spy actually does. And more than that, also be particular and intentional about portraying the role of a woman in intelligence and a female operations officer, and really show what it's like to be a spy, but also particularly what it's like to be a female spy.
Absolutely. I believe you have hit the right target, the role of women in intelligence agency, because this is one question that I always get asked by a lot of my family, friends, as sometimes we keep on working on insider risk management cases here in Europe. It's quite fascinating for the fact that people are always kind of I would say adoring the male intelligence officers, but really the role of female intelligence officer, I believe it's always hidden. I don't know why, even though we really have some great figures both here in Europe as well as in UK, in India too as well. But unfortunately we never really get to see those hardcore stories coming outside. And unfortunately, even I think Hollywood has somehow failed as well to showcase that thing in a greater way, the way they showcase other films as well. But I would like to take this opportunity through this podcast to showcase to our audience the kind of role the women have. It goes beyond what the conventional ways that has been portrayed in the films, or even what the people are hearing the rumors as well. It's not only about trying to hit the target in the intelligence, but it's also how well a women can lead the team as well, because I think we also recently had some of the intelligence head at the CIA who were the women actually, and having such female leadership really makes a difference at a lot of scale. So diving deep into the topic right away, how has the role of women in intelligence agencies evolved from early espionage work to modern leadership positions? Because I believe
Yeah,
a lot has changed from that time to the current modern day and age.
a lot has changed, but sadly, a lot has. has remained the same in many ways. And so, I can speak to how the role of women in intelligence has evolved through the years. Women have always been involved in intelligence. And before I wrote my book, I wrote an article called Why Women Make Better Spies. And it really was about kind of the characteristics of women that in many ways make them very well suited to being operations officers and to collecting intelligence. Unfortunately, we haven't to this day really seen that translate into women in positions of leadership, particularly in the United States in intelligence. And we have had one female CIA director, which was Gina Haspel. Wouldn't have been who I would have chosen to be the first female CIA director. Her legacy really is quite marred by having been integrally involved in the CIA torture program. But I think it's telling that in the United States, we've only had one female CIA director. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention we're recording this and we're talking 2 days after the US election. And I
Absolutely.
think that we are seeing in the United States a really big gender reckoning. We just reelected Donald Trump, a known misogynist, a known person who has no respect for intelligence organizations or for the role of intelligence. And it's sad but true that in any nation, the vibe trickles down from the top. And so as I speak to you today, I'm really gravely concerned, not just for women in intelligence, but for our intelligence organization. I don't know what's going to happen with the CIA when Donald Trump takes office, but I can pretty much guarantee that there's not going to be a reasonable, professional, female intelligence officer who is installed as the head of the CIA. And my greatest fear is that it might be someone with even no recognition or no knowledge of how an intelligence organization works.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's great that you have mentioned the current scenario as well, because it's just really fresh. The news of US elections is really fresh. It's not even been, I would say, 24 hours completely. It's really fresh. And I'm glad that this episode is coming out very quickly, so that people will have an extended perspective on what you're going to say in this podcast. To take a step ahead a little bit, from your perspective, as you yourself have been working for an agency previously, so what unique challenges have women historically faced in the male dominated world of intelligence, and how have they overcome from time to time, or are there any even ways to overcome the current hurdles that women face in the agencies?
Yeah. I can speak specifically to being an operations officer, and an
Yes.
operations officer, what people commonly think of as a spy, works undercover and works to recruit human sources that will provide his or her handler, who's a CIA officer, information that the US government wants. And there's a whole process to recruiting human sources. You have to spot those sources, you have to assess whether they have what's called placement and access to information that the US government wants. And then you have to develop a relationship with those sources and assess, is this someone who's a viable target for recruitment? So you're really you're kind of psychologically profiling that person, and you're looking at what are their motivations, what are their vulnerabilities, what are the characteristics that I can exploit and play upon in order to recruit that person and to get them to give me information, sometimes at great peril to themselves. And one of the reasons that I've often said that women make better spies is because I truly believe that women are more predisposed to this kind of work. And the women that I knew in the agency were the best recruiters, the most successful recruiters, very successful. They were the people that I looked up to most. But ironically and interestingly, they very rarely rose through the ranks to management positions the way that men did. And I think that's, a travesty and a disservice to our intelligence organizations, and to our ability to collect intelligence. All that said, I felt I was successful at what I did, for the short time that I had a career at the agency, and other women I know were very successful. But there are, in addition to the inherent advantages of being a woman, and let me just give you a kind of basic advantage. Most targets in the world are men. Most throughout the world, we still live in a very sexist world. We still live in a very sexist United States. So most places in the world, the person who has access to information is going to be a man. 9 times out of 10. I mean, I've recruited women, I've handled women. That's not to say that women aren't recruited, but most targets are men. It is much easier as a woman to make that approach, what we call a bump.
Yes.
To approach someone and come up with some man, come up with some excuse for wanting to talk to him, flatter him, play upon his ego. This just comes easier, or it came easier to
Yes.
me as a woman, and I think that's true of all of my female colleagues at the CIA. So that's probably the primary advantage. Also, you have a built-in cover story. If you're caught by the Internal Security Service in a hotel room with a man or in a parked car with a man, you've got a built-in cover story. We're having an affair. We don't want anyone to know about it. So there's those kinds of base level advantages. But at the same time, there are incredible challenges. And let's start with the bureaucratic challenges to begin with. The CIA, and most intelligence services, but I can speak to the CIA, is still very much a good old boys network. It is a place where it's very difficult for women to rise through the ranks. There's ingrained sexism there. To this day, from the time I was there and to this day, there are horrific incidences of sexual harassment and even abuse at the Central Intelligence Agency. And we still see that to this day. So in order to be successful in that environment, uh, you really have to kind of have like a Teflon shield when you walk in the door. And in many ways, you have to park some of your more feminine aspects at the door when you go into work. The other incredible challenge is that when you're recruiting foreign spies in this process where you're kind of courting them and you're developing a relationship with them, these male sources, and you're telling that you're flattering them, you're asking them out, you're saying to them like, don't tell anybody about our relationship. Actually, we're going to meet in very secret venues. 9 times out of 10, those men get the wrong idea. And they think that there is a romantic interest there or a possibility of romance there. And so one of the hardest challenges of being a female ops officer is striking that balance between manipulating your source in the way that is psychologically best, and you're trained on how to do that, and getting that source to commit to providing secret information to the U.S. government, and all the while controlling the situation enough that you're never in danger of sexual abuse or harassment, and that you keep control of the situation and make it very clear that it's a business situation and that you're never going to sleep with your source.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe I completely agree with you on this points, and I would say, just an extension of that, I would like to ask. I mean, this question is something I would say, you can answer it the way you feel it, because it can involve some real life figures as well. So, can you highlight some key female figures who have made significant contributions to intelligence agencies and changed the course of their organizations, especially the ones who have made a key impact on the
Yeah,
organization?
that's a great question. And if I think about it, again, the sad irony is that there have been so few women in positions of leadership. I can point to countless examples of women who have been behind the scenes and collecting intelligence. And I mean, a classic example, and this is not an intelligence organization, but let's look at Harriet Tubman, who was a spy, basically, and instrumental in transporting, thousands of enslaved people from the South to the North. And she was really an intelligence operative, a spy. She was a one woman operation, but truly, truly, just probably one of the earliest examples of someone who has made like a key difference in the course of the world and in the in the course of history. And then one example that I always like to point to, and it's an old one, is a woman named Virginia Hall, who was a truly awesome woman and arguably one of the most effective female spies in history. She was someone who was born into this wealthy Baltimore family. And instead of choosing like a life of coddled privilege, she decided that she would choose a life of service and adventure, which is exactly kind of what inspired me to become a spy. And even though she had actually lost part of her leg in a hunting accident, she traveled throughout occupied France, evading the Gestapo, evading German intelligence assets, and reputedly was one of the most dangerous of Allied spies. So, a really formidable woman that probably nobody or very few people have even heard of. She later joined the OSS, which was the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA. And even disguised as like an elderly milkmaid, she would provide information to help the resistance. Now, here's the unbelievable irony. She was the first woman to be actually hired by the CIA in 1947, but she was never fully appreciated there, and her skills were not put to use. Here's someone who had helped defeat evil in World War II, but even she could not combat the patriarchy and the bureaucracy within the CIA. And she ended up kind of, festering in the bowels of the CIA basement, shunted into a go nowhere career, even though she was one of the most formidable spies who arguably, changed the course of World War II. So that's just one example, but I will say this: there are countless examples of women who, behind the scenes, have been the key operators in recruiting sources, in collecting intelligence, in changing the world order. They have done so in small and quiet ways. And I think one thing that really needs to change within our intelligence organizations is that more women need to be in positions of management where they're deciding the strategy of the organization, where they're not just behind the scenes, but where they're even the outward facing individuals who are leading the organization, who are interfacing with Congress, who are interfacing with the president. Again, we've only had one female CIA director, and it was for a very short time, and it really was an anomaly. And I believe in my heart of hearts that the characteristics that female leaders bring to the table, not just in intelligence, but in politics, are so significant and so underrepresented and underappreciated. I will just add to that ironically, a few of our former female CIA operatives have left the CIA and entered politics and have had successful careers and continue to have successful careers as politicians. And that makes me inordinately happy that when a woman leaves the CIA, she still chooses a life of service, but out in the open, not overtly.
Absolutely. And coming to the leadership position, as you have mentioned, there are several examples. I know this is a very limited time podcast that we have of this first episode of the female leadership in the intelligence agency, but I really hope possibly to take a different outlook on several other cases and talk about those examples, because I feel if at all it is permitted to say that information in open about those female leaders, we can definitely kind of increase more and more engagement of the future incoming talent into this domain. Because for the moment people don't really are not aware, apart from I think fictional movies, they don't really have a base to refer to such a career option at the moment. So yeah, proceeding ahead, from the leadership role, I would say, what qualities do women bring to leadership roles in intelligence agencies that enhance decision making, operations? I think you also spoke about operations and strategy. But I believe you can also talk more on the decision making, because I believe that's the most critical part in intelligence. I believe I always tell to the people, one intelligence can change the course of an entire nation if it is used right, and if the decision maker is right on point.
Hmm.
So yeah, please
Yeah,
can you
I
proceed?
really encourage your listeners who are interested in the role of women in intelligence to do a deep dive on a couple different cases. And the first one is the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And it took us way too long to find Osama bin Laden. But the way that we finally did it was a team of all female targeters and analysts working tirelessly in headquarters and putting together the pieces of the puzzle to ascertain finally where bin Laden was. And that was all women. There are a couple, great books about it. But it was interesting because the first head of the group going after Al Qaeda, even before 9/11, was a man named Michael Schur. And he had a sign on his door that I believe it said something like, "No men need apply." He recognized in many ways some of the qualities that female, and I'm going to talk about analysts here instead of operations officers like I was, that female analysts bring to the table. I think women often have extraordinary powers of analysis and are able to connect the dots in ways that sometimes men aren't. One of the reasons that I always argue women make better spies is, for better or worse, we've been conditioned to kind of listen, and a lot of men have not. We're extraordinary observers of people, and we also have an almost innate situational awareness. Any woman in any part of the world has learned to carry herself in such a way that she's attuned to the safety of her situation. It's something that men don't even think about. I was taking a hike with my son the other day, and we passed a man coming toward us on the path. And I kind of, bristled, did my
Mhm.
immediate situational awareness assessing, like, is this person a threat? And I mentioned it to my son afterwards, and he said, "Mom, I never do that. I never think someone passing me on the trail is a threat." And so that ability that women are forced to develop, for better or for worse, really plays into how they think about the world, how they strategize. Um, I think that another characteristic that women bring to leadership roles in intelligence, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, is empathy. You don't think about the world of intelligence as being a place of empathy. You've got your enemies, you've got spy versus spy, you're out for the kill, it's a cutthroat organization, and that's very true. But if you don't have empathy and the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to see the world from their optic, you are never going to be able to understand how they think. And the key to recruiting human sources, the key to understanding why our enemies do what they do and what they're going to do next, is to understand their psychology and to be able to put yourself in their shoes and empathize with them. After September 11th, the CIA went on this mass hiring spree. And in my opinion, they really lowered the bar for the clandestine service. And I think that they hired a lot of, like gung ho, rah, rah,
Yeah.
American guys. Okay, those people are not going to be able to operate in foreign countries. Those people who believe I'm American and I'm the
Yes.
best and I'm better than anyone else. And, I'm going to go teach these, people of different races and ethnicities what's what. Those people are not going to be able to collect intelligence. And I think you see that kind of ego and that kind of hubris a lot more in men than you do in women. Women are more
Yes.
adaptable. We're better
Absolutely.
able to be chameleons. And we've learned to survive and navigate very uncertain and sometimes scary systems in the world. And bringing all of those characteristics to an intelligence service means you're bringing your life's experience in service to your country. And I think women are some of the most brilliant strategizers behind the scenes in intelligence.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you. The chameleon thing, I think you mentioned, going underneath and trying to keep a deep cover. I absolutely agree with you. It's something that women can do much better than men. It's I think it's a natural thing that we can't really do anything, but men tend to kind of burst out very quickly when it comes to certain kind of decision making. And I think I would like to give an example of this. I'm not saying this in a way that okay, this is only possible, but when there was COVID-19 that was happening, uh, the most stable countries which had proper, I would say, healthcare and aid going on were the countries with the women leadership.
Hmm.
Germany, New Zealand, then Estonia as well. So this all these countries have female leadership, either prime minister or the president. And I think that was one of the peak moments where the world saw in such a disastrous pandemic. The countries which had a female leadership were the ones kind of actually stable,
Yeah.
back then. I mean,
Yeah,
this is just
I
yeah, yeah.
really bristle when you hear the argument, and I've heard it from Americans in the weeks preceding the election that women are too emotional. I mean, what a joke that um, in this country we just elected someone who's a like a tyrannical toddler and a man, and we didn't elect a woman of great capability, and it's such a travesty for the United States. But I think you're absolutely right, and you see that in intelligence too. And I'll tell you another thing: it's not just empathy. When I was at the CIA, I didn't have kids, but sometimes my maternal in now I do. Sometimes my maternal instinct would kind of kick in. When you're handling a human source, you're taking care of them. Their
Yes,
safety is of paramount importance to you. And you have to care about their safety even more than you care about your own. And this is another thing that I think comes more naturally to women, that caretaker role, that counseling role, that, again, ability to empathize and to say, I'm going to put myself and my needs aside to make sure that this person is safe.
yes, absolutely. I agree with this. It really comes naturally. I mean, yeah, but when it comes to, I think, argument with certain people, of course, you can't, really win on this. But the fact can't be changed. And as I mentioned, we really have this not only in intelligence but even in politics. We have this example, as I mentioned, about COVID-19, that a female leadership can always rise even 1% more successful than what the male leadership is actually. Uh, yeah.
I just remembered. I wanted to direct your listeners to another case that's really interesting, where women were within the CIA, where women were really instrumental in changing the course of history, and that is the case of Aldrich Ames, who was one of the most devastating moles within the CIA. This is someone who was the head of counterintelligence for for Russia House within the United States. So this is someone who had access to all of the information about our Russian assets and spies during the 1980s. And it turned out was working for the Soviet Union and then Russia for, I think, 2 decades. And the CIA could not figure out why all of our Russian assets were being killed, executed, imprisoned. Uh, but obviously, there was speculation that there was a mole within the CIA. And it was the tireless work of two women who were finally able to analyze and put together the pieces and realize that it was Aldrich Ames who was committing treason and selling secrets to the Soviets. And that's just one other kind of prominent example. But again, countless examples of women behind the scenes, maybe not in leadership positions, but in their role, changing the course of history with the hard work that they do.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, as I mentioned, that, this is a very interesting case. We can definitely, kind of extend this conversation again in the next episode, because that topic that you mentioned just now about, the Russian spy, It's very interesting. I had seen, I had followed some of the cases actually back then, uh, during the Cold War time cases, basically how both the countries used to kind of, send spies to each other's countries, and in the neighboring states as well, including, I think, Mexico and Cuba too. But yeah, as I said, uh, we will definitely, I think, create another segment of the episode where we will be able to discuss this, because I was also not aware about this before recording this episode, that such a deep level of contribution of women is there on this level as well, as you mentioned. So
Hmm.
definitely I'm taking notes even in this episode to create a few more episodes with you in the future.
Well, I'll tell
Yeah.
you what, there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff to talk about with
Yeah.
regard to intelligence as we go into 2025.
Yeah.
It's going to be a wild ride, and I'm not in the intelligence business anymore. Obviously, I'm watching from the sidelines, but I'm watching with concern.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it would be good to have a few more perspective, extended perspective in the future from you. So yeah, I think a little bit extending on the kind of conversation that we were having right now. So, what is the impact of having more women in leadership roles within intelligence agency on the overall effectiveness of national security and intelligence operations as a whole? Because
Hmm.
I believe this also impacts the way the relations of the agencies with the politicians evolve. Because I think at the end, the politicians are an important part, where the
Hmm.
agencies coordinate with them. So
Hmm.
if we have more women in the leadership role in the agencies, how things basically evolve and what kind of impact it creates on a national
Hmm.
security level.
Yeah, I think that an intelligence agency needs diversity across the board, whether it be gender diversity, ethnic diversity. The CIA started out as kind of, a good old boys network where the Ivy League schools were fed into the agency, and it was very much a white man's institution. Our threats have changed over the years. And we need a diversity, not just of gender, but different language capabilities, different ethnicities. With regard to women, I think any healthy organization has, it doesn't have to be exactly equal, but I mean, here in the United States, women are 50% of the population, or more than 50% of the population. You can't have an effective and healthy, robust intelligence organization that doesn't have representation of women, women's ideas. Women are more educated than men in general now. More women are going to college. So women are really kind of forming a little bit more of the intellectual elite in this country. And yet we certainly don't see that reflected in our politics. And we don't really see it reflected in the intelligence organizations, and that has to change. There was just I would say a high profile case, but in fact, it wasn't really covered that much by the news. But there was just a case of a woman who sued a fellow CIA officer for a sexual assault, and this guy was known to have assaulted other women as well. In any event, he was just acquitted, and it really, really disappointed me. This is someone who, to this day, retains his clearance. And the woman who accused him of assault, with a very verifiable case, and there were other cases of him assaulting women, she was let go from the agency. And when I saw that, I was really disheartened, because when I joined the agency in the late 90s, I felt like it was going the right direction. My training class was 50% female. I was starting to see changes at the agency. I personally never felt, I was never harassed at the agency, and I never felt that I wasn't able to do my job due to sexism. Um, Unfortunately, I think it might have been two steps forward, or one step forward, two steps back, because I think we've seen in this country, and the CIA as well, a backlash. And it's scary. It's not right. And quite frankly, it has to change in order to have a healthy, robust and effective intelligence organization, you do need to have women in leadership roles. Absolutely.
Yes, I agree with you on this point actually. And I think we are at the final part of the podcast. So, looking forward, what steps can intelligence agencies take to continue fostering and promoting the leadership of women in the field? As I mentioned, that people are not really aware about this fact and the kind of role women can have in the intelligence agency beyond the traditional paths of what they have showcased, possibly in sitcoms or maybe TV series or films. And that's also the case why this podcast runs, by the way, to to showcase to the world that okay, we need to have a conversation about this topic so that more and more future generation are becoming aware about this topic. So yeah,
Yeah.
from your perspective, how the agencies can foster or harness the talent of women in this field.
Yeah, I think that I hope that we'll see another female CIA director in the near future or director of national intelligence. There are many women who play prominent roles in national security, and we need to see more of that. And I will say one thing: Hollywood gets it right, gets it wrong 90% of the time, but every once in a while, Hollywood gets some stuff right. And I'll point to shows like Homeland, The Americans, that really have gone a long
Yes,
way to showing the role of women in covert operations.
absolutely.
And so, kudos. I am not a kudos to Hollywood for that. I am not a fan of James Bond or the Bourne franchise. I think that I think they're deep rooted in sexism and not realism. But I think that Hollywood can do its part to show more realistic representations of female spies, and I've got some stuff up my sleeve to try to help make that happen. um, but I would also say that within the bureaucracies, um, first of all, harassment absolutely needs to be addressed. And one of the things
Yes,
that we've seen at the CIA through the years is that women who are harassed or abused are afraid to come forward. The CIA is a very difficult place uh, to discuss to discuss any kind of that malfeasance, because usually it affects your career. It's way too easy for intelligence organizations to sweep under the carpet that kind of behavior. So I do think we need independent oversight within the agency to prevent abuse and harassment from happening. But I also think fostering more female recruits, more female analysts, fostering equality within the organization, fostering female leaders and managements. It shouldn't take that long. We shouldn't be at 2024 and still have this much work to do, but it has to happen. And in spite of uh, the kind of overwhelming current that I'm seeing in this country of moving us backward, there need to be enough women professionals within the organization, former intelligence professionals who are willing to speak out and step up and continue to talk about the importance of the role of women in intelligence and national security.
interesting. Thank you very much, Lindsay, for providing this wonderful insights. I mean, this is the first time that we are hosting a former female CI operative on this podcast, and I really hope to record more such episodes with you in the future because this topic really needs a spotlight. I mean, look at me. I mean, I have been working in space and defense industry. I mean, in Europe, the European Space Agency is the only agency in the world where we have 58% female employees, and that too several at the leadership roles. But still, it was so tough to connect with a female intelligence officer who have been part of the agency or who have been associated with the security domain. It's really tough, to find
Well, stick with
people
me.
in this
I'll
country.
point you to some other women.
Absolutely, that would be
Yeah.
great. Absolutely. So yeah,
I'll just plug the book of a friend of mine, the author I.S. Berry, and she came out with a book last year called The Peacock and the Sparrow, and it's a spy novel
Interesting.
In 2023, it came out and it's won countless awards. It's a wonderful, wonderful, well written novel. And she's a former CIA operations officer like myself. Interestingly, she chose to write the novel. It's the main character is a man, and I asked her, why did you choose to write about a man instead of a woman? And she really thought about it, and she wanted to kind of show the sort of prototypical case officer, CIA case officer, and she does a marvelous job. But I'm sure she'd be willing to come on your show and talk. She's a fascinating person.
Absolutely. That would be great if you can connect me with her. Definitely. Because I really had several of the former CIA officers on the podcast, but this is the first time a female officer is coming on the podcast. So, yeah,
Well,
we
I'm
have kicked
so
off the
happy
series
to
with
be here.
you. Yeah, I think you are the opening player of this series. So, yeah, definitely. So, yeah, thank you very much again, Lindsay. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you
And
so
we
much
hope
for
to
having me.
record, yeah, we hope to record more such wonderful episodes with you in the future. Yeah.
Sounds great.